Ever since I watched Mario Bautista versus Umar Nurmagomedov, a certain question echoes in my mind and I can't get it out. Has wrestling become obsolete? And I say this because going back to Khamzat Chimaev versus Dricus du Plessis, Khamzat was supposed to be one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, and I still believe he is. I believe Khamzat is an even better wrestler than Khabib Nurmagomedov. I've made multiple videos on this. You can go check them out. So I was one of the people that picked Khamzat to beat Dricus because I studied both these fighters extensively and I just didn't see a world where Dricus was going to be able to outgrapple Khamzat or even weather the storm and finish him in the later rounds. Of course, there's always a possibility, but I just felt like it was unlikely. I went as far as to predict a second round submission perhaps. I didn't make an actual video on this, but I did see an early finish for Khamzat. But that didn't happen. In fact, the complete opposite did. Jalton Almeida possessed Khamzat for 30 minutes and forced him to control time max in one of the most highly anticipated fights of the year. Mind you, Khamzat is one of the greatest finishes the sport has ever seen. There was a point where Khamzat Chimaev went 4 fights with only absorbing one significant strike. That's 3 fights where his opponents couldn't do anything. And I don't even remember that one significant strike he absorbed from John Phillips. You're telling me this is the same guy that crucifix maxed to a decision, barely landing any ground and pound, barely going for any submissions, and even when he did go for them, Dricus defended them very well. I think this is a courtesy of Dricus du Plessis' anti-grappling as opposed to the lack thereof. Perhaps I could argue the same for Mario Bautista. He was obviously a significant underdog going into the Umar fight, and for good reason. Umar is one of the very few fighters who actually had a competitive fight with Merab to a point where people actually think he's the only fighter that stands a chance at beating him. So it only made sense that Umar was going to dominate Mario because Mario's best performances were robbing Jose Aldo and beating a Bellator fighter who has 0 wins in the UFC. But nope, we got the shock of our lives. Mario Bautista was the one who landed the hardest significant strike of the entire fight, that being the knee. And for the most part, he was looking like he was the one imposing his will in the striking exchanges. He would pressure Umar, get him against the fence. Umar was shooting for dear life. And when he would take him down, he barely did anything. He would secure a lot of positions. The body triangle, he would get Mario's back. He would get him against the cage, get him in body locks, take him down. But from a damage standpoint, he wasn't really able to pop off that much, especially for Nurmagomedov. But we should have known this because Umar has never been a damage guy when it comes to his grappling. He takes people down to stall, even against Corey Sandhagen. Do you remember him taking Corey down and landing some thudding ground and pound and threatening some submissions? No, he was just there to stall the fight. And there's nothing wrong with that because if you've already won striking exchanges and all you have to do is control your opponent for the next minute, you do that because that's the path of least resistance and that's what separates the good fighters from the great ones. And I think Khamzat Chimaev and Umar Nurmagomedov are among the best fighters in the UFC. And what separates these guys from your Aaron Picos and your Michael Chandlers, let's focus on Aaron Pico. I think Aaron has all the physical attributes. He's strong, he's explosive, he's fast, he has crisp boxing, he has the wrestling accolades. He's surrounded by people who nurture that because what I find interesting about Aaron Pico's career is that everything was just handed to him. I'm not saying he didn't earn it, he earned it, but I just felt like a lot of these other fighters have to overcome adversity, find the funds to fund their MMA career. But for Aaron Pico, he got an MMA contract before he ever made his debut. And sure, I doubt he would have earned that if not for his wrestling credentials, so we have to give him some credit for that. But all I'm saying is that Aaron is one of the few guys that really gets to say that MMA was his calling. The stars were aligned. And I'm a Christian man, so I don't really believe in that type of stuff. But my point is, it was just organic for him. And despite all of the wrestling accolades, physical attributes, access to training facilities, the best teammates in the world, and everything just going his way, he still got knocked out by a decision merchant in Lerone Murphy. And this isn't to say that Lerone isn't a good fighter. He is. I think Aaron is just not as good as we thought he was. And I'm rooting for him. I really hope he makes a comeback and somehow touches gold at some point in his life. But for now, I just don't think he's the best representative for the question, has wrestling become obsolete? I'm focused on the killers like Merab Dvalishvili, Umar Nurmagomedov, and Khamzat Chimaev. And just looking at the majority of the champions in the UFC, or just the highly ranked fighters, or the ratio of wins to losses for wrestlers compared to strikers, I don't think wrestling has become obsolete. I just think people, myself included, have really high expectations for wrestlers because of how dominant they look early in their careers and because of the success of fighters like Khamzat, Chimaev, and Khabib Nurmagomedov. And just to point out the flaw in saying wrestling has become obsolete, let's turn our focus to striking. Israel Adesanya is one of the greatest strikers to ever step foot on this earth, yet he got jabbed and teeped to a decision by Sean Strickland. He got knocked out by Nazardine Imavov. We also have Corey Sandhagen, who got knocked down by pillow hands Merab Dvalishvili, Alexander Volkanovski, who got dropped by Brian Ortega. The list goes on. So do with that what you will. You guys let me know what you think in the comments. Has wrestling become obsolete, or is there another explanation to some of the recent performances we've seen? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.